Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome. I'm Nellie Szilagyi-Benedek, Deputy Director for Education and Programs here at the Jewish Museum. Welcome to our first Director's Talk of the new season, a program featuring James S. Snyder, Helen Goldsmith Menschel Director, in conversation with artists, authors, and other cultural leaders and thinkers, exploring the role and relevance of art in this moment. These talks offer a forum for dialogue and discourse for public audiences of diverse backgrounds and perspectives, all of whom, nonetheless, embrace the Jewish Museum as a setting for learning and engagement. The director's talks are part of the Morris W. Offit Lecture Series, made possible by the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel Foundation. We are extremely grateful for this support. On November 13th, James will be joined by filmmaker Toby Pearl Freilich and the subject of her recent film, Maintenance Artist, the artist Mirle Lederman Ukeles. Tonight, James Snyder will be in conversation with artists Jacqueline Gourevitch and Joel Mesler, who share connections with the artist Ben Shahn. Ben Shahn's work is currently on view in the exhibition downstairs, titled Ben Shahn on Nonconformity. If you did not get a chance to see the exhibition, it remains on view through October 26th. Jacqueline Gourevitch was born in Paris and immigrated with her family to the United States in 1940. In 1950, she studied at Black Mountain College, a school with an illustrious faculty list, including Willem and Elaine de Kooning, Joseph Albers, and Ben Shahn. Among the student body at the time were Robert Rauschenberg, Kenneth Noland, and Cy Twombly. In 1973, Jacqueline Gourevitch was included in the Whitney Biennial. In 1975, she showed at the Wadsworth Atheneum as part of their Matrix series. And in 2015, Helen Molesworth included her work in Leap Before You Look, Black Mountain College, 1933 to 1957, at the Institute of Contemporary Art, Boston. She began her ongoing series of cloud paintings in the 1960s. Her ethereal, close-cropped clouds evoke various genres of painting, from abstraction and Fauvist landscapes to abstract expressionism, without straying from her singular vision. In 2000, Jacqueline Gourevitch was granted studio space in the former World Trade Center. In 2003, she began her current tenure in the new towers and has continued to paint clouds and the city from the 80th floor, as well as from her studio in Tribeca. She creates her own subtle and vast visual world, one that continually reflects on how we see and experience nature. Joel Mesler was born in LA and now lives and works in East Hampton, New York. His paintings shed light on universal themes by filtering them through autobiography, humor, self-deprecation, and surprising compositional juxtapositions. Childhood memories fuel meditations on design and popular iconography, along with the liquid, fluid, and mutable nature of the painting process. In recent years, Joel Mesler has explored the power of acceptance, allowing emotions, as well as the cultural forms in which they become constellated, to exist at the center of his project. His work has been the subject of solo exhibitions at Rockefeller Center, Levi Gorvi Dayan, the Long Museum West Bund, Shanghai, David Kordansky Gallery in LA, and Harper's Books, East Hampton, among others. We are so pleased to welcome Jacqueline Gourevitch and Joel Mesler to tonight's conversation with James Snyder. I would like to remind everyone to turn off your cell phones and refrain from recording during tonight's program. And now, please join me in welcoming our speakers.
You want to start with a joke? The wall joke.
Yeah, you can start with your wall joke.
Pardon?
The
your
wall
wall joke. The two walls. This was our sound check a little while ago.
We were asked for a joke, and the joke that came to my mind, and I don't know a great many, but this one always stayed with me, was, what did one wall say to the other? And the answer is, meet me at the corner.
There were other jokes during our sound check, but we liked the subtlety of this one. So, in any case, it's a pleasure and a privilege, really, to be here with all of you. As you've heard from Nellie, this is an ongoing series. Oh, and before I begin, we have to thank Nellie and Jenna Weiss because they managed this series for us, and it's very heartwarming to do this and to have a room full of guests who really are engaged with the artists, writers, thinkers that we have as our guests from time to time. So we thank you guys, and let's hear it for them. So as Nellie mentioned, and I'll expand on it just a tiny bit, this is sort of the start of the third round of this series, which we started in the spring of 2024 as part of our action plan after October 7 in 2023. And our thought then was to underscore the point that we see the need, the importance of preserving humanism, and that we see and understand and embrace that the role of museums, all museums, but us in particular, is to be custodians of the history of world culture. Without humanism, there is no such history. And for us at the Jewish Museum, this is that narrative really from antiquity to the present time. And from that moment on, we felt that it was very important to make clear that we see ourselves as a platform for engagement, as a stage for engagement, like where the three of us are sitting right now. And the point is for us to be a kind of model for activism for the museum culture and for artists through their art as a way to find a brighter future. And October 7 was a difficult moment, and alas, for better or worse, things are not better today. And in a much broader way, in a much more pervasive way, things are, I don't like to say worse, less good, even less good. And for us, the role really needs to be a kind of counterpoint with everything that we do in the museum, and at moments like this, be a counterpoint to the kind of ignorance, the racism, the xenophobia, the polarization that we're seeing everywhere, and that a phenomenon that's really trying to overtake us, and our role has to be to push back in a big way. And tonight, it's really sort of cool. I was sitting there looking up here where it says, in conversation with Joel Mesler and Jacqueline Gourevitch, and I thought, we're actually in conversation with Ben, Shahn, and Jacqueline and Joel. But you're going to hear the Ben part from these two, and it's really touching to do so. To have them here is actually, it's great. And I have a little backstory, which I need to tell you, which is why the three of us are sitting here and have come to know each other in these last many months. Our Ben Shahn exhibition opened on May 20th. I hope many of you were here then. I trust you've all seen the show since then. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, so as not to embarrass those of you who have not yet, but you still have another month and a half. Don't worry. When we opened our show, it was the first Ben Shahn exhibition in New York in almost 50 years. The last one was actually here at the Jewish Museum. And exactly for such a time as this, we seized the moment a year before, in May of 2024, to create this exhibition. There was a much larger exhibition of Ben Shahn at the Reina Sofia in Madrid, curated by Laura Katzman, who's with us, and I'll explain why. And we got hold of Laura and said, can we, from that exhibition, make one for the Jewish Museum here that can be exactly to the point of the challenges that we're facing today? Given Ben's profile, for those of us who knew his work, as an artist committed to speaking out on behalf of civility, on behalf of human rights, in all the mediums that he chose to use, and to all audiences. And it's amazing, we opened the show, and for many of us here, this was like bringing back, resurrecting someone that we all knew who had meaning for the moment. what we discovered almost immediately is that if you're under 50, you'd never heard of Ben Shahn. And now, a lot of under 50s know Ben Shahn and appreciate him in a big way. It's a sidebar of modest pride. Our attendance for this past season with Ben Shahn doubled over the same season a year ago. It's something that's pretty amazing. So,
Well done.
so here's the little story. Several weeks before our show opened, I was at a luncheon for another museum, and Joel Mesler was a guest speaker there, and a young curator was actually interviewing him, and he said, listen, if you died and went to heaven, what other artist would you like to what other artist would you like to partner with in a museum exhibition? And he said, Ben Shahn. And this young curator said, who's Ben Shahn? Now, if that had been me, I might have said, oh, tell us more. But instead he said, who's Ben Shahn? He wasn't in any way embarrassed by doing so. And it's amazing. And you know, it was really very kind. Joel didn't just, in Joel's response, he shouted out to me, sitting in the audience, and he said, you know, Ben Shahn is the spirit of my being and the spirit of my work, and James Snyder's Jewish Museum in 3 weeks is opening the first retrospective of Ben Shahn in New York in 50 years. And I'm thinking to myself, how did this guy know about Ben Shahn? I think he's 53.
51.
So, are you, really?
51.
He just got in there.
I just got it.
So anyway, that's that part. And then 1 week later, Jacqueline Gourevitch had an opening at 52 Walker Street. Onyeta Kachuka, who is the gallerist there, is with us this evening. And we were at her opening, and the conversation immediately turned to what artist really inspired your work in the most profound way. And she said, Ben Shahn. And I said, well, do you two guys know each other? And of course they do, and the bond between them is Ben Shahn. So what was I supposed to do? Of course, immediately I had to say, when we do our first director's talk for this coming season, the two of you have to be our conversants. So let's give them an applause, because it's really great to have the two of you here. Now, these two are two very different kinds of stories. I mean, this guy, he's only 51. He's like born and bred in LA, and he got here, but he didn't even stay here. He went out to those Hamptons, so his life stretched from one side of the continent to the other. Jacqueline's story is very different. She came from Paris at the age of 7 to New York. She did have a moment at Black Mountain College. All those guys that Nellie mentioned that are part of our gang here in the history of the Jewish Museum either had been there before her or were there with her. And she absorbed a lot from that moment. And why I wanted almost immediately to do this conversation was to have a chance for this museum once again to be a docking station for the kind of thinking that produced an artist like Ben Shahn. So many of the artists who were Black Mountain artists and who informed the work of two artists who were like, 40 years apart. 40 years is 2 generations. We all know that story about from leaving Egypt and wandering the desert for 40 years before coming to the promised land. Why? Because it's 2 generations. You need 2 generations to change the thinking, to change the agenda. And yet these 2 artists, 2 generations apart, are so bound to the inspiration of this artist that it seemed really important to have this conversation. So let's start. Let's see, Jacqueline, first you tell us from the beginning. Bréchit, in the beginning, you were in France, you came here, and just tell us how this story unraveled to today and to your recent and very amazing exhibition in Tribeca.
I'm going to try to be very brief about what seems like a very long period of time. We came, I arrived in New York with my parents. I'm an only child, and New York became really home for a long time. I went to the High School of Music and Art. My mother was an artist, a very good one, and painting seemed like the most natural thing for me and immensely fulfilling. Nevertheless, I went to the University of Chicago, which at that time didn't teach studio at all, because I thought I'd better learn something and read the great books, which was basically the curriculum at that time. And I found my way to painting then, taking some courses in Chicago, also at the Art Institute, and working on my own. I started showing in Chicago, and eventually came back to New York, and that's a short version of a long story. How's that?
It's okay, and it gets us started. And we're going to get to when Ben popped into this picture, but first, really, Joel, talk to us about yours.
Yeah, hello and thank you. I'm Joel Mesler, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me. I first came across Ben Shahn in college, and I didn't think I was going to be an artist. I didn't really know what I was doing even in college at the time, but something about the guy caught my eye. And as years went by, he always kind of stayed with me. It was the text, it was the line drawing, it was something different every time in the work. And just to fast forward to my life, he's always kind of, there's been aspects of the work where every stage I have been in my personal life and in my artistic career, Ben has traveled there with me. And I say him because it's kind of like he's kind of been there on the journey with me. And so even, I walked through the show right before the talk with Laura, the curator, amazing curator and exhibition. And, going through the exhibition, there was a moment where I feel that Ben took the archives and took the images, and it was time for Ben to kind of help what he thought society and help serve humanity and serve. And so he made posters, and it was all about the content. It was not about Ben anymore. It was about serving, and it was about the art, and it was about the people. And not to, stand on the shoulder of giants, but I kind of feel at this point in my life, it's done, I'm done being about Joel. And so, I'm with Ben now too, at that stage.
We need to unpack a lot of
Yes,
that.
of
But
course,
before we
of course.
do, Jacqueline, tell us, it's interesting. We've had a few conversations anticipating this evening's conversation, and I felt in the course of doing so that for Joel, the embrace of Ben was a kind of spiritual embrace. For Jacqueline, it started as experiential, because your life took you, he was not any longer Black Mountain when you were there.
Oh, no, certainly.
But he popped up on your landscape early along. But tell us when and how.
Quite early. I mentioned that my mother was a painter, and I would tag along when she went to shows. And I do remember when I was in high school, here and living in the city, that that I encountered her work. Mostly what we would look at, because of her interest and also of mine, were abstraction. to see a contemporary working with the subject matter that he worked with in such a compassionate and direct way was very moving. It was a real kind of discovery. Oh, one could also do that. It was very different from what I would normally see. And I connected with it, and it seemed very powerful. And it still is. I mean, I think this show is very timely, both in terms of social difficulties that we are experiencing now and that reflect his time also.
You know, before, I want us to stay with Ben, but also in our earlier conversations, we talked about whether or not for each of you, are there other artists that have moved you in the same way as Ben Shahn?
For me, it would be George Grosz.
Yeah, it was so interesting in our conversation earlier when you had mentioned George Grosz, because also the German Expressionists were so influential to me in terms of the imagery and how they portrayed, you know, society and stuff like that. But to go back to Ben, and what we were saying is that George Grosz, there was sort of a despair and a darkness where, you know, Ben had this, there was this light and there was this optimism even in the fate of darkness, you know, where George Grosz, there was really the sinisterness that I think Ben didn't have.
I completely agree,
Yeah.
right.
And in our discussion, we talked about how a big part of that was the time in history and the place. The time in history for each of them and the place where each of them was when they did their work.
Right.
And it's amazing when you look at artists and you think about how their spirit and their work resonate with the times they're in. There's no way to avoid that. And you know, it's interesting. Look, we think about Ben Shahn and we think about that moment, 50s leading into the 60s after the war, and this kind of divide between representation and abstraction, and how languages evolve. And what you just described is exactly why Ben Shahn took that route.
Right.
And so many others took the route of abstraction. And then thinking about your vocabularies for each of you. I mean, your work in a way, and if you talk about clouds and think about clouds in a funny way, it's the accuracy of representation, but its appearance is abstraction. And in your work, it's so much about text and image always being pulled together. So it's a different dialogue from yours. And yet, again, each of you is being inspired by Shahn and his vocabularies. So say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a constant inspiration coming from Ben and, you know, the directness that he had. You know, I always, when I'm asked, you know, why I use text in my work, it's the ability to kind of get there quickly and be direct, and the way that Ben was able to get there and use text to kind of convey the content, you know, as quickly as possible, because there's stuff to say, you know, and again, you know, not having made work for so many years and then returning back to art making, it was like, how quickly can we get the message out? And I think, you know, using text in that way and the need to disseminate the information, you know, so to not mess around, you know, just get to the point.
You know, stay with that for a moment because, and again, it's a little bit of a distinction between you. You started making art, you did something else, you came back.
Yeah.
So how did that affect your thinking about your work and the languages that you use from the first round to your interim and then the next round?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, so interesting that you say George Grosz too, because, you know, when I first started making work out of college, I ripped off the German Expressionists, that language. and it was, very rough and expressionistic, and I felt like I was yelling, yelling at my audience, even though I had no audience. But nobody liked my art, and that's why I stopped making art. I had to get a day job, and I sold other people's art. And I felt like I was telling, I was yelling and telling, and again, it was the despair. And so I had to stop making art for many years. And so it wasn't until I returned to making art that there was, I think, this desire to share, something that Ben does in his work. He tells stories, he shares stories, as opposed to the German expressionists, doing that. But I think that there was also something that happens in Ben's work where, feels a bit disenfranchised, right? Or identifies with, the worker, the artist that not part of. And so, to the desire to always want to be the artist, but not succeeding at being the artist. When I got to be an artist again, it was a great thing. And so, again, I was forced to kind of try to get there as possible, or make my message clear as quickly as possible.
And the embrace now of your work has been very strong. I mean, it's been very big.
Baruch Hashem. Yeah.
But why do you think that is so, as distinct from when you started?
I think because I am sharing instead of telling. And I think that in art, I think there's a huge distinction. And I think that, however it happens or however it comes, I am at a point in my life that, not to get too personal, but that, I am trying to get out of my own way a little bit, like Ben is. When you go through the show and you look at his work, it's not about him. He is a vessel for something so much larger. He's doing it for, the workers. He's doing it for the artists. He's doing it for African Americans. He's doing it for civil rights. He's doing it for the Jews. It's not about Ben or how Ben's feeling on Tuesday.
And it's explicit. His messages are explicit for them, and yours in your work now also takes that same approach.
Amen.
And Jacqueline, yours is a totally different story. If you look back from the 60s on, you've been doing these clouds, and there have been and it's always been painting, right? You're a painter.
Always.
You don't see yourself as anything but a painter.
Well, I'm
in your artwork.
in my artwork. Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I've tried other media, but I'm very, very happy with a brush and paint. Mm-hmm.
And those clouds have been a subject for you from
The 50s.
From the 50s, really, on.
Right, because I started with like a student, first with still life. There was stuff on a table, and then I was really interested more in landscape, and the part that I was interested in was above the table or above the horizon. I mean, there was something comparable about that, and I realized I'm not obliged to support the thing I'm really going for. I'll go straight for it. But I've also painted other things over the years, and most recently, as you mentioned, I've been painting also up in the World Trade Center, and I've been interested in my painting over the years with dealing with subject matter like the clouds that is nature, and that I cannot shape, that is a given on it. Some days there are no clouds, it's just all blue. And the man-made environment of the city. In Chicago, I did a lot of city paintings. Here, working at the World Trade Center, I when I heard some painters were allowed to work on high floors, I applied for that, and when I got up there, what fascinated me was looking down. And so, although I thought I would have this great view of the sky, which I do, what was extraordinary was the man-made, our built environment. And so I've worked with both, and that's been very interesting. But throughout my painting, whatever the subject may be, I've also worked sometimes very abstractly, and I feel a need and a deep curiosity to do everything or anything that interests me. I'm not a party liner.
You know, looking at your work and having seen your work in the show at 52 Walker, it was really very interesting to look at this trajectory over time, because it's like the intersection of representation and abstraction. It's not like you have to pick one instead of the other. Shahn picked one. And it's like you are doing representations of abstraction. And the clouds make it really easy, because they look abstract, but they are nature. You are depicting them. And you know, those works you did in the 70s, notations,
yes,
where it looks like representation is trying to poke its way through
yes,
the veil of abstraction. So it's a dialogue, and it's funny, it's subtle, but there's yours is explicit because words and text,
Yes.
words and images. Yours is explicit because you're taking those two approaches, and a casual glance can make you think it's in this direction, but if you look with focus and intensity, you understand that you're playing with both.
Well, I do care about the fact that when painting is a language, and so what is on the canvas can be read and understood in many different ways, depending on what the viewer brings to it. And I like exploring that range.
I think for both of you, part of what connects you to Shahn, and it is remarkable, I mean, look at the timeline of his life, from the Depression to Vietnam. And his responsiveness in each of those turns in the course of time is remarkably exacting and remarkably focused. And each of you does the same in your work, again, with different languages. So, you know, this is like that young curator who was interviewing you. If you died and went to heaven, what would you say is your iconic work for each of you? What would you...
You go first.
You know, I've been thinking recently of just words that would encapsulate a body of work. And, you know, Robert Indiana got love, right? I mean, so I can't, you know, that's it. But I think that there's, if anything, you know, maybe I have a little piece of joy. There's something about joy that I have found my way to joy, and that there's something about joy that is different to me today than it was in the past, and that joy is not something that you know, joy is, it's not something I strive or I strove to find or get. And the text that I'm now comfortable just kind of laying it down on my different maybe surfaces or in my different fonts, and that that I feel comfortable in that space, and I do feel like I have achieved, like it's sincere. I feel like I've achieved joy, like it's an inside job a little bit, life,
So
finding joy.
Is there a single work for you that embodies that?
Well, I think it's using that text. I think it's like, as maybe Robert Indiana had love, I feel like when I used that text, that's me. I found joy. I found it inside of me. I didn't find it out there. I found it inside.
What do all those rabbis that you paint have to do with joy?
Curveball. I think that's the thing is, looking back, I also paint rabbis. Opening a show, if I could do a plug. Hug from the Art World. This Thursday, a show of rabbis called Dear Rabbi, where I have 11 new paintings and over 120 rabbis from my own personal rabbi collection. I have a problem. It's a rabbi collecting problem. I'm the custodian of lost rabbis, and if anyone else wants to be the custodian of these lost rabbis, I'm willing to talk after this talk. I don't need this responsibility. I didn't ask for this responsibility.
We have some as well here,
Yes.
but we might want to take a few.
Yes, we could schmooze afterwards. But I think in these, the inadvertent mitzvah, I think, by these rabbi paintings is that looking back at these rabbi paintings, they're dreary. They're gray, they're sad. And I actually asked my rabbi, I was like, I feel a little guilty. They're sad. And he said, Joel, it's not so easy to be a rabbi. And especially some of the rabbis that these paintings were painted in, it was even harder then to be a rabbi. I mean, now it's probably hard again. Goes through phases, as we said,
We're going to come back to
Yes.
that.
But my paintings of the replicas of the old rabbi paintings, I try to kind of instill, I just paint them, but add some color, add some joy. And so by people buying my rabbis, you add a couple zeros, you add some color, it's like bringing joy back to the rabbis, a little Judaica back onto the walls of Madison Avenue, boom, joy.
We're going to come back to Jewishness in art, but first, Jacqueline, from your really impressive and vast body of work, if you wanted to identify something that you felt was iconic in your work, what would that image be?
The one that comes to mind is the notations, but I have to explain that the notations is a series or 11 canvases that are 72 inches high and 44 or 46 inches wide. It's now at the Wadsworth Atheneum collection in Hartford. Where I started this 11 tick, if I can call it that, as a triptych. And then I added another panel, and then I cut one more, and it ended up as 11. And I was really aiming to, in some way, get all kinds of possible formations that represent or embody, if it's possible to use that term for clouds, what I find so moving and endlessly fascinating about the sky, which keeps changing. How you're going to catch that? I mean, sometimes I just feel like Nabokov going out with a butterfly net and trying to, get this thing right. Sometimes I just go for a walk and then come back in order to draw what I've just seen, to somehow catch it on a flat surface where I catch it. So in the notations, I tried to, and I took the space or the multiple surfaces to make one work that embodied not all, but I think a great many possibilities of how clouds can look and how we might think of them.
You know, you brought me such joy citing the notations, because without having heard you talk about them, looking at them, you do see that there's a language wanting to emerge from the veil of the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And I find them very moving. In a way, they're explicit, and it's interesting. These are two different approaches to explicitness, which also brings us back to Ben Shahn. But in these, they really are quite stunning. And I think when you did them, they all went directly to the Wadsworth Athenaeum.
Yes. Yes.
And there is one that is not there. It might want to come to 92nd Street and 5th Avenue. It's so stunning. And really, it's very moving to have heard what the two of you just said, because in fact it is about different ways to be explicit, and that is what Ben Shahn is about. You know, I want to shift to the subject of Jewishness. I mean, today there's this whole thing about Jews being Jewish, and people are constantly asking me about Jewish artists, and I say, don't talk about Jewish artists. You can talk about artists who are Jewish. It's like, you don't talk about Israeli artists. You can talk about artists who are from Israel, or who live and work there, or who are from Israel but live and work elsewhere. But where I want to focus is on Jewishness in art and artists who are Jewish, and how your Jewishness has played a role in your art in the same way that it did for Ben Shahn. And in a way, it wasn't explicit for a really long time, and toward the end it became explicit in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way of saying it and describing it. I think that as a Jewish artist, I think, or as a Jew in general, I mean, we got a certain responsibility. We are the light upon the nations, right? I mean, we accepted the Torah, good or bad, this is what we do. And so, as a Jewish artist, I think this is the light. There's a certain light in the work, certain responsibility, whether you want it or not. I mean, even another Leonard Cohen quote is like, if you don't want to be a Jew, you don't have to be a Jew. End of the story, right? Like, I mean, I don't know if it's that easy. That's what he said. But we sort of, it's in us, and I don't know. This is what we do. Sometimes I think the world around us shines the light on it more so, our Jewishness. But I think if we just stay on the light and our responsibility, this is what we do, right?
Jacqueline?
I am a painter, I am a Jew, and that I am Jewish is something that I've although I'm not observant in any traditional kind of way, but from the beginning, as I began to think about things, I realized that my being Jewish determined why I was born in France, because I was born in 1933. In 1932, my parents, who had just gotten married in Berlin, left Germany as Hitler emerged, and that's how I came to be in France. I came to be in this country when during the very beginning of the war, and but at some point, I don't think of myself as a Jewish artist. I don't think of myself as a woman artist. I refused at various points, at least 2 or 3 times, to participate in shows that were billed as women's art, because I just felt I'm a painter. But that I am a woman or that I am a Jew doesn't enter in my work in a way that I would wish to have it identified that way. And at times, when I spent half a year in Jerusalem, my husband taught philosophy and he was invited to teach at Hebrew University. And I said, I have to have a place to paint. And somebody suggested I could have one of the little studios at Mishkanot, Sha'ananim, and that was wonderful. And I had a direct view of the old city from there. And but while I was there, I just couldn't bring myself to paint. It just seemed like they were somehow an immoral thing to do something that I sometimes think is very self-indulgent because I love to do it so much. And I didn't really see it as productive. It was a very difficult kind of feeling there. But when we came back from that period in Jerusalem, I spent 3 years doing a series of very large paintings of the walls of Jerusalem and processing that light and the structure also. I had visited, when we went to Jerusalem for that period of time, I had very much in mind also numerous trips that I had made to Greece and dealing with ancient sites and stones and structures that were built with the debris from previous structures that had collapsed in that place, of rebuilding. And that was something that struck me so much as I looked at those walls, and that I tried to convey in those paintings, that the differences in the stones, that some of them are beautifully built and others are very, very rough. And that was very important to me.
You know, this became part of our conversation in preparation for this evening. And when Tina and I and our family went to Jerusalem, part of the power of Jerusalem is that it's a city built of its bedrock. And if you look at the walls of the old city, they emerge from the bedrock. And what you're describing is exactly that phenomenon. And you know, I have this thing about all things connect across time and around the globe. And so Jacqueline's studio was at Mishkanot Sha'ananim, which is where I lived for the first year that I commuted to Jerusalem before we could move our family there. So I would have that same view of the city emerging from its bedrock. And then 20-some years later, when we moved to Jerusalem, Joel came for the first time for a year that he spent there.
Yeah.
Did any of what Jacqueline just described, did you absorb any of that during your year?
Oh yeah, very much so. I still feel like I carry that with me. I mean, that space, that light, I mean, it's the source of it all, I think. Very much so.
You know, it's touching. It's touching listening to the two of you about this. It's an experience, your experiences resonate so much with what our experience there was about. And it's not about being Jewish. And you know, we get this question all the time here, and especially after October 7 about Jewish artists and Israeli artists. And our point is we don't collect them because they're Jewish. We collect them because they make brilliant art. We don't collect Israeli artists because they're Israeli. We collect them because they make brilliant art. And people understand that and they accept that. And you know, part of it is, it's like, Joel said this, you did say this, I say it all the time, the Spirit of the Lord is in you. It's not about being religious or having a religious identity. And the other thing, this point about we're supposed to be a light unto the nations, we all eat that cereal whether or not we grow up with religiosity. And that is part of what combines us. And you know, on October 21, I hope you all know that we're opening 2 new floors of collection galleries on the 3rd and 4th floors just above us. And our message there is about this notion of the ideological and spiritual binding that connects all of us. Has nothing to do with religiosity. It has to do with that spirituality. And you know, we should wrap it up, and I want to come back to Ben Shahn at this point. With this point, you know, really, Ben Shahn's work, the explicitness of it, from the beginning on, and the connection, always this direct drilling into things happening at the moment around him. Yeah. And it is an artist's job to absorb all of that and turn it into work. And you know, in a way, you can look at his work with a casual glance and think that there's nothing spiritual about it. And yet, the end result of it, and as you look toward the end of his life, the way that his work radiates that spirituality connects to what your work is about for each of you. Forget that your vocabularies are different. His was different. It's about that. So say something about that on behalf of Ben so that he's part of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I see his spirituality in all he does. I mean, when I was younger, again, you know, to go back to the German Expressionists or even the abstract Expressionists in America, you know, I used to think that it was, if you pour your soul out onto the canvas, that somehow was spirituality. And as a student, you know, I was kind of raised as like the heroic male dripping paint onto the canvas, a little drunk on whiskey, like that was the spirit. And I thought that, you know, I really believed that was spirituality. And years later now, you know, an older man, 51, I realized that is a thing called ego, you know, and that's not spirituality. And when I look at the details, like we were seeing in like the fence of, you know, a New York City like playground where children are playing handball, that Ben Shahn, and the labor that goes into the detail. To me, that is the spirituality. That is the spirit coming out, the description, the time, the communication. That is spirit.
Well, I have found this exhibition very moving, and also some formal aspects of his work, the way in which he's a draftsman. I mean, primarily, I think what is so powerful is his drawing, the linear part that holds and depicts the subject. I'm using this word subject, which many people object to, but I still find it a useful term. But I find the delicacy of his drawing, and we were just before we came up here, we were looking at the show together, and we were looking at this fence and the way that was a detail in it, but the geometry of it you could see that he was very fascinated by the way he was drawing it. So there are many formal qualities in the painting that interest me. And it is work that I remember seeing a long time ago when I was like a teenager, and thinking at that time, where I was mostly tagging along to look at abstraction, seeing, here is somebody more or less a contemporary or a modern artist dealing with the world as it is, as it looks, and feeling that he did it with great compassion.
You know, it's a good way to end our conversation, because in fact, you look at these works and there's this rawness there, but really, it's about being a light unto the nations. It's like you have to deal with the rawness because it's happening around you, but you want to elevate and give a message which is well beyond it. And I think we want to thank the two of you for your input this evening.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Really a pleasure to have the two of you here. Ben would have appreciated it greatly. We're here. If you want to come up and speak to us, we're going to stay here in the front for a few minutes, and we'd be delighted to talk. Thank you all for being here.
That was great.